The bells rang one final time across the Aegean dawn. High above the coastal cliffs of Chios, where cypress trees bent toward the sea, the Sisters of St. Catherine had already heard the news. Ottoman galleys had been spotted at sunrise, red and gold banners cutting through the morning mist like blades. Inside the stone walls of their convent, built 3 centuries earlier by Byzantine hands, the women gathered in the chapel. 42 nuns, ranging from novices barely 16 to the abbess herself, Sister Theodora, aged 73. They prayed beneath frescoes of saints whose eyes seemed to watch what was coming. Outside, the village had already emptied. Farmers fled to the mountains. Fishermen pushed their boats toward open water. But the nuns had taken vows. They would not abandon the sacred ground they had sworn to protect. By midday, the sound of hooves echoed against the convent gates. The year was 1822. Greece was burning with revolution, and the Ottoman Empire was responding with systematic brutality. Islands that had harbored Greek fighters were being purged, village by village, monastery by monastery. Chios would become infamous. Over the next 3 months, nearly 50,000 Christians would be killed or enslaved. But among the atrocities, one story was deliberately hidden, buried so deep that even modern historians struggle to piece it together. What happened to the nuns of St. Catherine became a whisper, a rumor dismissed as propaganda, until a sealed archive in Istanbul was opened in 1987, revealing Ottoman military correspondence that confirmed what survivors had been saying for over a century. If you're drawn to documented evidence from suppressed historical archives, don't forget to subscribe. It helps us uncover more testimonies that empires tried to erase. Now back to the gates of St. Catherine. The Ottoman commander, Hassan Pasha, had specific orders. The island's rebellion had to be crushed so thoroughly that no spark could ever reignite. Religious institutions were not exempt. They were targets. When the soldiers reached the convent, Sister Theodora stood at the gate, crucifix in hand. Through a translator, she was given a choice. Open the doors and accept Ottoman authority, or face the consequences of resistance. Her reply was steady. We are servants of God, not of earthly power. The gates lasted 11 minutes. Cannon fire shattered the oak beams that had stood for 300 years. Smoke poured through the courtyard as soldiers flooded inside, their boots crushing the herbs the sisters had grown for medicine and prayer. The women were herded into the refectory. The youngest clung to the eldest. Some clutched rosaries. Others stood frozen, too terrified to move. A Turkish officer entered, flanked by scribes carrying ledgers. This wasn't random violence. This was administration. Each nun was recorded: name, age, skills, literacy. The scribes worked methodically, as if cataloging livestock. When Sister Theodora demanded to know their purpose, the officer replied coldly, "You will be reassigned. Service to the empire or service to God. The choice is yours." But there was no choice. The women who refused to renounce their faith were separated immediately. 28 remained in the refectory. 14 were dragged into the courtyard. What happened next was never written in full. Ottoman records describe it only as necessary discipline for those who chose defiance. But a Greek fisherman hiding in the cliffs above the convent witnessed enough to later testify before European investigators. The screams carried across the water until sunset. By dawn, the convent was silent. The altar had been stripped. The bells melted for coin. The surviving nuns, 28 women in torn habits, were bound at the wrists and forced to march. Their destination was the port of Smyrna, over 200 miles south. The journey would take 12 days. No carts, no mercy. Just the road, the sun, and soldiers who saw them not as human beings, but as problems solved. Sister Maria, a young novice from Thessaloniki, collapsed on the 3rd day. Heat stroke, dehydration, despair. The other sisters tried to lift her, but a soldier struck her with the butt of his rifle. When she didn't rise, he ordered her left behind. One of the elder nuns, Sister Paraskevi, refused to move. She knelt beside Maria, cradling her head, whispering prayers. The soldier raised his weapon again. Sister Theodora stepped forward. "Take me instead." The soldier hesitated, perhaps moved, perhaps simply calculating. He looked at the abbess, then at Maria's lifeless form. Finally, he shoved Theodora back into line and ordered the march to continue. Maria was found 2 days later by passing villagers. She survived, barely, and decades later her testimony would surface in church archives. She described Sister Theodora's act of defiance, her refusal to let a soul die alone. It was the last act of mercy Maria would witness on that road. By the time the survivors reached Smyrna, only 22 remained. The others had vanished into unmarked graves, sold to passing traders, or simply discarded when they could no longer walk. The port of Smyrna was chaos. Thousands of Greek captives crowded the docks, waiting to be sorted, sold, or shipped east. Among them, the nuns stood out. Their habits, though filthy and torn, marked them as something rare. Christian women bound by vows of chastity were valuable, not for labor, for symbolism. They were loaded onto a ship bound for Constantinople. The voyage took 8 days. Below deck, shackled to wooden benches, they shared space with criminals, slaves, and prisoners of war. The air was thick with salt, sweat, and the stench of human suffering. At night, Sister Theodora began to sing, softly at first, then louder. A Byzantine hymn, ancient and mournful. One by one, the other sisters joined her. Their voices rose through the darkness, filling the hold with something the empire could not shackle. Even the guards fell silent. A Serbian prisoner later wrote of that moment, "I did not believe in God until I heard those women sing. If hell has a sound, it is chains. But if heaven has one, it is what I heard that night." When the ship docked in Constantinople, the surviving nuns were paraded through the streets. Locals paused to stare. Some spat. Others looked away, unwilling to meet their eyes. They were led past the Hagia Sophia, the great cathedral turned mosque, its Christian mosaics plastered over, but still faintly visible beneath the whitewash. One of the sisters whispered, "We stand in the house of God, but it no longer remembers us." They were taken to Topkapi Palace, but not to the grand halls. Below the gardens, beneath the courtyards where sultans walked, lay a network of stone chambers, forgotten rooms where unclassified captives were kept. Here, the nuns were stripped of their remaining habits and given rough linen shifts. They were told they would serve, cleaning, sewing, tending fires, invisible labor for an empire that had erased their names. But the Ottomans underestimated them. These were women who had already surrendered their lives to something greater. Hunger, cold, and silence were not punishments. They were the vows they had already taken. At night, they prayed in secret. Sister Theodora, now frail but unbroken, scratched a cross into the clay wall with her fingernail. Another sister traced psalms into the dust. They began counting days by the call to prayer, not out of conversion, but as a clock for faith that refused to die. Weeks became months. Some were taken for questioning, a kind word, an offer of bread, a promise of freedom if they would simply say the words. Those who refused disappeared. Those who complied were never seen again either. 2 sisters from Crete, young twins named Eleni and Anna, finally broke. After 40 days of isolation, they whispered the words the interrogators wanted. They were dressed in silk, given new names, and led away. Decades later, a Turkish servant would claim she once met a woman in the palace who spoke Greek in her sleep, calling out for her sister. No one knows if it was Eleni or Anna, or if either truly survived. For the remaining sisters, each disappearance hardened their resolve. Sister Theodora's voice grew weaker, but her eyes burned brighter. When a guard demanded her name, she smiled faintly. "I have no name. Only God remembers me now." One night, while carrying linens through the lower corridors, Sister Irene discovered something. A sealed archway, half hidden behind stacked crates. The mortar was old, crumbling. She pressed against it and the stone shifted, Behind the wall was a small chamber, no larger than a prison cell. Dust covered the floor, but on the walls, faint markings remained. Christian symbols, Greek letters. Someone had prayed here long ago. The sisters began to gather there after midnight, when the palace slept. They brought scraps, a broken mirror shard shaped into a cross, a piece of linen for an altar cloth, pottery shards for candle holders. In that hidden chapel, they rebuilt what had been taken, not with gold or incense, but with whispers and memory. Each woman shared a fragment of home, a church bell, the taste of Easter bread, the warmth of a sister's hand. These memories became their new psalms. A Venetian merchant, held captive in another part of the palace, later wrote of strange voices echoing from beneath the harem, women singing in Latin to a god not of this empire. For centuries, his account was dismissed as fantasy. Until 1954, when renovations beneath Topkapi uncovered a sealed chamber. Inside, archaeologists found carvings, crosses etched into stone. A phrase in Greek, barely legible, phos en ti skotia pheni. The light shines in the darkness. That discovery changed everything. It proved these women had not simply vanished. They had left a mark, a silent revolt carved into the walls of the empire that tried to erase them. By 1825, a new sultan had taken power. Among his first orders was a purge of palace records. Every servant, concubine, and laborer was accounted for, except one group. In the Topkapi archives, beneath columns of names and numbers, there is a blank space. 22 entries missing. The ledger reads only, disposed, unfit for service, no dates, no burial records, no explanation. This is how empires erase history. Not with fire, but with withheld ink. But silence leaves traces. In 1831, an Ottoman courtier's private diary surfaced in the archives of Bursa. One entry, cryptic and brief, mentioned the foreign women who sang until we sealed the rooms. Another letter, intercepted by Venetian spies in 1827, spoke of Christian captives who refused the Sultan's mercy and were returned to dust. Together, these fragments reveal a truth the empire had buried. The women were not released, they were not converted, they were removed from existence. The last confirmed record of Sister Theodora comes from a Greek survivor, interviewed in 1847. She had been a palace servant, forced to work in the lower chambers. She described hearing a voice one night, faint but unmistakable, singing a Byzantine hymn. When she asked a guard about it, he told her to forget what she'd heard. "That room is sealed now," he said. "No one goes there anymore." The servant never learned the singer's name, but she remembered the hymn. It was the same one the nuns had sung on the ship from Smyrna. Over time, the story faded into rumor. Palace servants whispered of cold air in the lower halls, the faint scent of incense where no fire burned. Some called it haunted, others called it holy. European visitors to Constantinople heard fragments of the tale. A French diplomat, writing in 1852, noted that among older attendants persisted a forbidden story of Christian women who prayed themselves into eternity. He dismissed it as superstition, but the walls had already told the truth. In the 20th century, as the Ottoman Empire collapsed and Turkey emerged, historians began to piece together what had been hidden. Church records from Greece, survivor testimonies from refugees, Ottoman military logs that had escaped destruction. And beneath Topkapi, in that sealed chamber, the carvings remained, names scratched into stone, prayers half erased by time, proof that faith had survived where bodies could not. Today, the chamber is closed to tourists, but researchers have documented every marking, every cross, every desperate plea for remembrance. One inscription, found near the floor, reads simply, "We were here. God knows." The bells of St. Catherine's convent never rang again. The building still stands, partially restored, overlooking the Aegean. Tourists visit for the view, unaware of what began there. But in the stone corridors beneath Topkapi Palace, where sunlight has never reached, the voices of those women still echo, not as ghosts, but as testimony, as proof that even in the darkest chapters of history, some souls refuse to be silenced. Their names were erased from ledgers. Their graves were never marked, but their faith was carved into stone, where empires could not reach it. Sister Theodora, Sister Maria, Sister Irene, and the 19 others whose names we may never know. They did not ask to be heroes. They did not seek martyrdom. They simply refused to forget who they were. And in that refusal, they became eternal. If this story moved you, leave a comment below. Tell us what you felt when you learned what they endured. And if you want more untold histories, stories buried beneath empires and silence, subscribe and step deeper into the past with us. Because some truths deserve to be remembered, no matter how much time tries to bury them. The light still shines in the darkness, and we will keep it burning.